There we go. Cool. So, um, Aristotle Politics, Book One. Um, I,
Aristotle Politics, Book One, yes.
I guess my first question is, we're going to be reading Book One and Book Three, so I just wanted to know, why did you choose those books?
That's fair. Um, the one of two things. One, I've taken a lot of our reading lists and basing it on the St. John's reading that I went through in the graduate program. And those two books were the ones that were selected.
Okay.
Um, the So part of it is going to be a sake of time,
Hmm.
and then also sort of the whatever relevance to the overarching question about politics, and he's ultimately going to get to like the perfect regime, right?
Hmm.
Um, I So in the spirit of full disclosure, I am not familiar with the other books,
Okay.
but I will add to this. The second piece is I found in my library an Aristotle anthology, so it covers a bunch of other texts in one volume. And guess what? It has the politics. And guess which two books are there?
One and three.
Totally unaffiliated from St. John's,
Okay.
one and three. So I'm wondering if there's sort of a standard, agreed upon notion that these two books are important, really important, uh,
Hmm.
and sort of maybe hit more of the like key Aristotelian ideas as opposed to the others. But I can't comment on it more than that.
Sure. I wonder what he skipped in two. What was unimportant?
Yeah, exactly. But I imagine, I mean, obviously, like an Aristotle scholar or just anybody could pick up the politics and read all the books.
Sure.
Um, so what I wanted to do, but quickly,
Hmm.
is introduce Aristotle.
Sure. That sounds
Um,
great.
yeah, because the and none of the biographical stuff. I mean, that's something you can look up, but at least in terms of setting him up philosophically in contrast to Plato.
Hmm.
So I'm just basically working metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics in brief. So if you recall with Plato in the Republic and our discussion of him, he's clearly a dualist, a metaphysical dualist, right? Two worlds, the intelligible realm and the
Hmm.
visible realm. And and this is important. All of the forms are in the intelligible realm, and in some mysterious way connected though to the visible realm.
Hmm.
Okay, but their pure essence, as it were, is in the intelligible. Um, Comes Aristotle. By the way, Aristotle did actually study with Plato at his. Plato started a university, as it were.
Yes.
Actually, the first university in the West called the Academy, and Aristotle
Hmm.
attended it. Um, but there's a major break. And one philosopher in the 20th century said, I think Alfred North Whitehead once said that all of the history of philosophy is but a footnote to Plato and Aristotle, meaning that they present enough of a contrast that subsequent philosophy sort of keys into one or the other without necessarily being Platonic or Aristotelian, but it
Hmm.
sort of leans in one direction or the other. Anyway, um, Aristotle, then, in contrast, is a monist, which believes in one world, and it's the world that you and I are looking at. There is no separate world of the forms.
Okay.
So, what he does, though, is he does have the formal element in his metaphysic, but instead of lodging it up in this sort of heavenly sphere, it's here in this world. And it also does not have all of the same formal characteristics that Plato's notion does. For instance, it's not eternal and it's not unchangeable and things like that. For what he did with his metaphysics, he comes up with his so-called four causes. The word can be sort of understood as explanations, because cause is a little tricky,
Hmm.
but it's classically called the four causes, or for our purposes, the four explanations. So basically, what he does is in this one world, when you look at anything, it's be broken down into these explanations, these four, of which the formal is one of them. Okay, so everything does have a form, and like forms themselves, the best way of understanding a form for Aristotle would be basically the traits that distinguish this from that. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm sitting on a chair right now, and I'm able to, someone would be able to look at me in the chair and notice that my traits as a human being are, in many ways separate and different from the chair, and then I can distinguish the two. So my form is the thing that enables you to recognize me as human, and enables one to recognize the chair as a chair.
Mm-hmm.
A simpler way is, this is too crude, but maybe something's shape. Okay, the outline of something. So that's one cause. Everything has it. And then there's a material cause or material explanation. That's very easy. It's what the thing is made out of. So in the case of this chair, metal, and then there are pillows, so cloth and filling, cotton, I guess. With me, the material is obviously going to be, everything that I'm made up of, from bone all the way out to my epidermis. And you can do this with anything in the world. And then there's the efficient cause. And the efficient cause is what brought that about. What created that thing. So my parents would essentially be my efficient cause. The company and the builders that created this chair would be its efficient cause. For, I guess, organic life, like plants, it would be sun, soil, water, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then this is big for Aristotle, and you saw it throughout the politics, and I know you covered some of his virtue ethics in another class,
Mm-hmm.
but the final cause. So we've got formal, material, efficient, and final, and the final is what its purpose is.
Okay.
And he believes, and you saw this in the politics, that everything has a final cause.
Yes.
Right? Nature does not waste time. Nature is purposive in all that it creates. So, you see what he did there is that he took the form out of the sky, as it were, and put it into things in this world. So we still have the form, but
Mm-hmm.
the form can be destroyed. Meaning, my form, whatever. When I die and I turn to dust, my form has now been altered.
Mm-hmm.
And I no longer have the form of a human being. So that's why it isn't permanent and unchangeable.
Right. So forms are not immutable, and
Correct.
they his idea of the formal cause
Mm-hmm.
is it seems so. You said the differences between things. So it's instead
Yeah.
of grouping things into a category like Plato would do,
Mm-hmm.
it distinguishes them between some sort of classifying term or multiple, right?
Yeah. Correct.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, your voice is coming across a little bit slower and deeper, as if there's a connection problem. I'm not sure if that's being recorded or if I'm just hearing it.
No, it shouldn't. My recording is on my computer, so it's getting straight out of my microphone.
It's getting you.
Yeah.
Okay. It's odd. But it could be my connection. I'm not on Wi-Fi.
It might just
I
be my
prefer not to
Bluetooth.
be. Yeah. Okay. That's fine. You just sound like a double bass.
Whoops. No.
Epistemology. We've talked about this. Of the two, I mean, there are more theories of knowledge than these, but these are the two big competing ones. Rationalism. So I come to know things on the basis of reason alone, not my senses. That's Plato. And then, no surprise, we're going to find Aristotle taking the opposite view of empiricism. So he is not going to just take things on the basis of what his mind can discover on reason alone. I believe we'll find a little bit more of this in 3, where he, instead of coming up with this, with this ideal state that Plato does with just raw thought, right? I mean, we talked about this at the end of our discussion last week. It was pretty cool to develop your own ideal state with just the operations of your mind, right?
Hmm.
That's not going to be Aristotle. Aristotle's going to look at actually existing constitutions and regimes and then analyze them.
Okay.
And so he's much more of an empiricist. And the empiricist would basically say that I know, I use reason, obviously, logic, right? But I also use the senses abundantly to come to know X. Um, of note, he Aristotle's works are voluminous. Is that the word? No, I'm not getting the word right. A lot of volumes. It's encyclopedic. Okay,
Hmm.
and he actually did some work in, if you will, like early ancient Greek biology, and and you know, so you could already get this sort of scientific sense about him with some of the work that he does. Um, in addition to being the so-called father of logic, because he finally does in his works on logic explicitly write down how logic should be done. He analyzes the syllogism. He develops a square of opposition on the basis of various propositions like all S or P, no S or P,
Hmm.
some S or P, blah blah blah. So he's very explicit about those things. So like reason's fine. It's just that he's much more of an empiricist that is going to use the senses to come to know. So
Okay.
that's going to be another contrast. Now, here's the bridge then. You know his virtue ethics, okay, like what you need to know, right? And that it's important to see that there's a bridge then between the ethics and the politics. His main work was the Nicomachean Ethics.
Hmm.
There's another ethical work that he does. I can't think of it right now, but in that he's describing basically the happy life intended for the individual, for you know, for the human.
Hmm.
So like how ultimately will someone reach happiness, which he feels is the final aim of our actions anyway. That you
Yes.
can't go higher than happiness. You can't. You can ask why be happy, but you're probably going to get into a circular because happiness is good.
Yeah. No, he has this.
Um,
What is it? There's instrumental values and intrinsic values,
right, right,
and happiness is an intrinsic value,
right. Exactly.
and all
You got
things lead up to it. Yeah.
it. So so the and the so basically there's this connection between the ethics and the politics because, uh, if you will, virtue leading to happiness is important for the individual, but in the politics we're going to find that the political community is going to play a role in bringing about the virtuous life for the citizens. So you can see sort of the connection, and by virtuous life we add on to a happy life as well. So it's almost sort of like the ethics is looking at the individual, and the politics is looking at individuals collectively
Hmm.
within a polis.
Gotcha.
One thing to just sort of add here, he is highly, we've already mentioned this with the final cause, highly teleological. There is a telos, a final end, purpose, goal to everything
Hmm.
that exists. Um, and so that includes, what's going to happen in the politics. And as I already said, you saw that with all this language about nature, and there's the thing I saw a lot was a lot's based on nature, and a lot's based on the final purpose of X.
Yes.
So that's my sort of opening.
Okay.
I guess one more thing to notice is that the word now in the Politics Book 1, the Greek word for household is oikos,
Hmm.
um, and they actually get our word economics
Economics. Yes.
from that word. So and yeah, so the household becomes really important in this early part. I'm going to turn it over to you for a bit since I've been talking.
Okay. So I guess one thing I've noticed is kind of a similarity between him and Plato is like this
Hmm.
idea of efficiency.
Yeah.
Because Socrates and Plato had this idea that every person has a thing that they're best at in their
Hmm.
ideal society, and then that was the efficient way to have a city state.
Hmm.
And in the same way, Aristotle seems to believe that everything um, is to be used for what it's supposed to be used for, or like it
Right.
has a purpose, and that is the most efficient use of it.
I think he even uses, or at least in the translation I used, because I know I gave you the links, but then when I found my book, I was like, a book, was expedient. The word expedient came up
Hmm.
a number of times.
Yes.
So connected to what you're saying.
Yes. Um, yeah, I don't know exactly where I want to start because I've got some notes. I kind of got like three major topics from this.
Yeah.
And I'm most interested in discussing the last one, but the other two are
Okay.
definitely important.
Okay.
So, I mean, at the beginning of the book, he talks about the political units. So we have
Hmm.
individuals, we have the household, we have a
Right.
village, and we have the city-state.
Hmm.
Um, and the kind of the idea that he was giving was that the city-state comes before the man or the individual,
Hmm.
um,
Right.
and
Because
like the
it's the
individual's
whole.
yeah is dependent
It's the
on
whole. The man's the part.
yeah is just dependent on the structure of the city-state. And if he weren't dependent, the argument was that he would either be a god or like a beast. He'd be outside
Hmm.
of the city in some way instead of being dependent on it.
Sure.
Um, So yeah, so there's also this idea that like the higher units in this hierarchy kind of protect the lower units, or are
Hmm.
like concerned with things that would distract the lower units from their purpose.
Right.
So there's things that the city state kind of handles that the individual doesn't want to worry about, or that the individual, that allows the individual to focus on what makes them happy. Um,
Yeah.
so everything's kind of connected at making the individual happy. Um,
Sure.
uh,
And also, and I would add to that, and also, what is the nature of that individual,
mhm.
right? Because I mean, we don't need to jump into this now, but the nature of the man versus the woman, or the husband versus the wife,
Yes.
and the child and the slave, it's not just about their happiness, but that there's something essential that makes them that identity that will, and ergo, they have sort of a particular function,
Right. And it's different. It's not like the
right?
same among everyone.
Correct. Correct.
Um,
Some things, yeah, no, no, go.
so one idea or something that related to like Socrates' philosopher king, I was like kind of picturing that with the city state because the goal of the philosopher king was to maintain justice and kind of
Hmm.
um, have this sense of normalcy, and
Hmm.
everything's all right
Order.
with the state, yeah, order, um, so that the individual can focus on their particular art. So
Hmm.
that's something that I was correlating.
Yeah, no, exactly. That I think is a really interesting connection between the two, even though they're approaching it
Hmm.
differently, as it were, right? Because Socrates is sort of all allegedly all doing this based on reason alone,
Hmm.
which probably isn't fully true because he's looking at men and women, right? You
Yeah.
have to look at men and women and sort of see how they behave, and then I guess draw conclusions. But
Well, I mean that kind of goes into the
but
whole intelligible world, real world. He's
yeah,
drawing conclusions and bringing it up into that other realm. But yeah, I see what you mean.
precisely. Yeah. And then you're absolutely right. I mean, the I was going to say that they are both essentialists, meaning that everything has a particular essence, or if you will, when we're talking about humans, that they have essential characteristics. For Aristotle, because he was explicit about it, that were given by nature, right? Um, and um, and I see sort of a similarity there, right? Like when Socrates talks in the Republic about like looking at the young and sort of seeing which ones sort of have like the philosophical temperament, you know,
Hmm.
and then shifting them onto that track, that track. It's sort of like, hey, but based on their nature, who they are, um, yeah, we're going to sort of rear them and encourage, whatever further their education in philosophy, let's say.
Hmm.
And you can see that with Aristotle as well. Like, there are those that rule, and there are those that need to be ruled,
Right.
and nature has made it that way. So I do, as a sidebar, we don't need to talk about this right now, but I think it becomes relevant. I think especially when it comes to our final book on identity politics, about whether or not where we are on the question of essentialism,
Hmm.
whether or not humans really do have a particular essence, or, if you will, various groups have a particular essence. Because certainly you see this in their discussion already. I'm sorry, as we put these two books together.
Hmm.
Um, a word about what he's doing in book one at the start, and it should be recognized when Socrates develops his ideal city. It's seemingly from, if you will, intellectual scratch, right?
Yep.
So he's got this sort of open space in his mind, and he's just starting to, like, well, what does it need? What's interesting here, and we're going to find this in a number of the works from here on out, is um, a origin story, and this becomes pretty popular among, not necessarily Aristotle's version, but this becomes sort of popular, of sort of like imagining how it actually did develop historically in real time,
Hmm.
in real history. Um, and and this is sort of interesting because, in a way, maybe archaeologists today and paleontologists have a better grasp than the rest of us do. But those sciences were developed, until what, 1800s, and then refined in the 1900s up to the present. So it's sort of interesting to because Hobbes is going to come up with one. I believe Locke is going to come up with one, I think. But Hobbes is totally going to come up with one, of sort of this origin story about how we became, how civilization developed, or society developed. And it's
Okay.
just important to note that, while it sounds very interesting, like, I mean, none of them really know historically,
Hmm.
at least at this time, how they developed. I mean, it could be the case that Aristotle's absolutely right, in terms of families. It starts with the family, and then families are, living together, and now you have a village, right?
Hmm.
And then the village grows, and then we have, I'm sorry, then you have several villages coming together, as he writes about, in chapter one, and then you have this partnership that ultimately creates what we call a city.
Hmm.
So it's an interesting origin story. Um, but the question that we have to just have in the back of our minds is, to what degree is it actual versus hypothetical?
Hmm.
Um, but it's a nice step, and it does seem to make sense, right? You're not going to just have an individual. We do find sort of like men and women getting together. I like how he says they want to make an image of themselves, or a representation of themselves,
Right.
by having children. So you have the family unit, get that, and then families start to live near each other, and we call that a village, and then villages start to pop up, as it were, and then they want to work collectively together in a partnership, and we call that a city. Um, so, um, just remember this when we get to Hobbes, because Hobbes is really interesting, his,
Okay.
his particular story.
And
But I
it's
won't.
a lot different than this one.
Well, no, it would be somewhat similar, but but Aristotle's not really describing the the fuller characteristics of the life prior to the city.
Okay.
It's more, he's talking about these units, but he's not talking about what the life was like. And Hobbes has a very specific view about what that life was like,
Okay. I'm
which
assuming. like hunter-gatherer kind of society
Yeah,
evolving.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, but as he describe yeah, exactly, as he describes it, it's the um, overwhelming character that is negative, which necessitates coming together to partner up.
Mm.
Okay, and there's nothing really negative about this world before the city as we have it from Aristotle.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, it's not his point. It's more of his like, you know,
Well,
this hierarchy of units.
yeah, I mean, he doesn't have explicitly say that it's negative before, but he does say
Yeah,
that the city-state's purpose is for man's happiness. So you
you
could,
you are right.
right? So there is like, um, whether or not it was negative before isn't just stated, but there is progression forward with the city-state, is what he's
You are
saying.
absolutely right. And when he says that only a beast or a god could become virtuous outside the city or happy outside the city, that speaks to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the human can't become a god, so that's out. And if you're outside the city, then you are left to being a beast,
Mm-hmm.
as it were. So you're absolutely right that once we do get to the city, that it's essential, it's important, far more important than the isolated family or the loner, because the city is the function is ultimately to make you virtuous
Mm-hmm.
in a much grander way, seemingly, than you could on your own. Well, you couldn't on your own, according to him, or but even within just a family. So you're right. There is that necessity of the city uh, in order for humans to live well
Mm-hmm.
and flourish. Um, just one thing about this,
Yeah.
though, is um, um, this is line 1252A3. It says this is my translation. It is clear that all partnerships aim at some good, and that the partnership that is most authoritative of all and embraces all the others does so particularly, and aims at the most authoritative good of all. This is what we call the city or the political partnership. And just a note about this idea of partnership:
Mm-hmm.
the foundation then of the city is partnership, or if you will, uh, citizens of a political community are partners. And this is sort of interesting because, in contrast to modern day nation states, is that we don't really look at that being the foundation. We look at it more being a constitution, a set of some type of like written legal document that establishes this state or nation state as a nation state and gives it direction.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting contrast. Um, and let's keep in mind too, nations. I believe he's going to go on in 3, but don't quote me. That ultimately the ideal city is actually going to be relatively small. So nation states, which obviously didn't exist at his time, I think he's going to end up criticizing because it's just too big to do the function of bringing about virtuous citizens. So, in other words, the city's the final, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, as the nation state, in our case, is the final
So
entity.
was the Greek nation not like uniting of the city-states back then?
There were alliances. There were alliances when it came to war and things like that.
Okay.
But no, at Athens, every city, uh, every major city was its own sovereignty. So Athens would be a city state, and there would be no UN above that. There would be no, um, uh, you know, yeah, further regime.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm forgetting the one in Europe right now. What's the one in Europe where it's
Not
like all of the different? that Britain's trying to exit from. I can't think of it. It's not euro because that's the money, but like where there's sort of like this higher sovereignty over those countries. So yeah, let's put it this way: Athens is its own entity and is beholden to no one but itself. Sparta, the same thing. You know,
Is this in
you know,
contrast to like the Roman Empire?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So the with the now the yeah with the Roman Empire, then it's like boom, you know, the Roman Empire spreads and pulls all these in. But I do have to be careful here because uh, I don't. I'm getting a little bit confused, and I have to research this because Alexander was a conqueror.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering
Alexander the
about.
Great, he was a conqueror, so that meant that he was, if you will, colonizing other countries. But the question is, you know, to what like
Like,
were they under?
was he just
Yeah,
kind of getting
was
the
he
new
conquering
states
them and
and
making them?
like
Yeah,
gathering the new
yeah,
states and setting them up with some sort of initial policy or something to,
yeah, and making them Greek, as
yeah.
it were. Um, so, but I will say this: the certainly at the time that Aristotle's writing, and Plato for that matter, you have these small cities that are their own sovereignties.
Hmm.
Um, but it's just a sort of a point about how you how the foundation of the political foundation of a particular regime for him is a partnership, and for us, for instance, it's a constitution.
Sure.
It's not to say that there wasn't a partnership, as it were, like people getting together in this, social contract, sort of notion. But it is. He doesn't at any point say that this highest political entity is based on a written law. It's not to say that laws aren't important and they won't be addressed,
Right.
but the starting point is this partnership. So just an interesting contrast
Yeah.
to the contemporary world.
Um. Okay. So I guess more quickly on this second point, because I want to get to this third point.
Sure.
But on the second point is about the household management or the economics. There
Mm-hmm.
was this. So he has this statement like every good or piece of property has a purpose for which it is most useful. And we talked about this a little bit. And he
Mm-hmm.
gave the analogy of a shoe being used as a means of trading versus like collecting or
Mm-hmm.
using or wearing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
clearly the purpose of the shoe is to wear it to protect your feet, but you can also, like people nowadays, collect shoes just to look good or for fame.
Yeah.
But back then you might have used shoes to trade for other goods so that you could obtain those goods. But that's not necessarily the most efficient use of it or expedient use of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so again, I mentioned this before. This feels very Socratic in fact that it has a purpose, and
Mm-hmm.
it's best to use for its purpose. Um,
Yeah.
but this also kind of spawned the idea that money has the purpose of exchanging for goods and services. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it replaces the need to exchange things that have their own inherent kind of purpose.
Right. Right. Yeah. Exactly. It's interesting when he talks about sort of the bartering. When he talks about the bartering, and then later he talks about usury or interest,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, which, yeah, which our society is hugely based on, right? In terms of making money,
Yeah.
making money on money. Um, but when he talks about those, it's I don't know, because you've got the barter system at one point when he's talking about using the shoe to barter for something else, right? Right.
Yeah.
Meaning there's in that example there's no money.
Hmm.
It's one one object for another, one product for another, and then
Well, can I add something here?
yeah, mm-hmm.
So I guess kind of to get the conclusion that it is inefficient. Say you have like three entities or three individuals, and they each produce a different good. One produces a
Yeah,
shoe, one produces like has a farm, produces food, and one produces clothing, for example. And the one, like, say the person who wants clothing, but the person who wants clothing wants the food, so it's like
Hmm.
you have to make two trades in order to get the thing that you want.
Yeah.
So you have
Yeah.
to first trade your shoe for food and then trade the food for the clothing. Whereas
Hmm.
with money, it's like this commonality that everyone can
Sure.
trade with. So I guess that brings up the inefficient. Like you can trade once with it, and that's efficient because that's its
Yeah.
purpose. Whereas trading the things themselves is inefficient because you have to go through more trades essentially.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It streamlines the whole process.
Hmm.
I can have someone come over and paint the house, and I don't have to be thinking about what I can give them, and if they even want that.
Yeah.
you know, it's just here's the price. It's straightforward. So it's sort of like a one-step deal. Agreed.
Yes. Um, so I guess we can move on to this last idea that I'm looking at. So he talks about the good life a lot at the end of
Hmm.
this book, and
Hmm.
how the good life has limits, but life in general is unlimited.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a couple things that kind of spawn from this. So I guess so the argument develops from the fact that obtaining unlimited wealth or property as an
Hmm.
end is not like worth it in Aristotle's point of view,
Sure. Sure.
because it's inefficient and wasteful, right? Because there's no
Hmm.
end to doing it. It just keeps on going. So
Hmm.
you'll never be satisfied. You'll never be happy if that's your primary goal. Um, and so he I don't remember exactly how he got from specifically wealth to life in general, but I guess it kind of makes sense. Like if that is one aspect of life, and there are many aspects of life, then if you pursue something that is unlimited, then you'll never be satisfied.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
limiting the life that you're pursuing will lead to more happiness, which is his goal.
Correct. Correct. Now this is really interesting. I mean, he says on 1257b38 that they are serious about living, but not about living well.
Mm-hmm.
And since that desire of theirs is without limit, they also desire what is productive of unlimited things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think your point is right that like I mean it's sort of a fine line here like because he's not against he's not against business,
Sure.
right? He's not against business. Um, um, like meaning in other words like um, one yeah whatever when the one one can create something and sell it and that's not a problem.
And he's not against
I think
profits
it
either.
be pardon me.
He's not against profits either, right? Like a
He's not against,
surplus.
yeah, exactly, right? Because he gives what two examples, right? The one of Thales
Mm-hmm.
and the wine or the oil presses, right? By the way, Thales is actually considered the first philosopher in the West. There's not much that's extant of his writings, um, but there are a few stories and a couple of statements um, that they can put together. So yeah, he's not against profit. Um, and you know what? It's going to be this element, I think, of moderation.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you go back to the ethics, it's the mean between two extremes
Mm-hmm.
is where you will find the virtue, and it's the extremes where you'll find the vices, the vice of deficiency, the vice of excess,
Mm-hmm.
and both vices, or sorry, leading a life based on either vices is for him ultimately not going to lead to happiness. So if you sort of intertwine what he says here about wealth without limit with the ethics, then you can start to see sort of some of the rationale. That I
Yeah.
mean, there are more reasons, but the one reason being is that it's and it's true, right? We talked about it last time. Like, you how much is enough? Just a little bit more. I mean, so there is this element of it it is without end. I mean, I guess I mean, it's limited in the sense that there's only so much money in the world, but um, saving that extreme that no one could ultimately reach in a lifetime, it is, for all intents and purposes, without limit. Um, I think the other thing too is that, and I'm sort of adding this, but so my one point is it's a vice because it's an excess.
Hmm.
Um, the other thing I would add to it is, and he hasn't really talked about this, but time. Like you only have so much time. God knows you know this. We all know. You only have so much time in a day, in a week, in a year, in a lifetime, right?
Yeah.
And it's spread out with things that you have to do to take care of basic necessities.
Hmm.
So the reality is that if you look at someone that works on Wall Street and is doing like 24/7, um, for the particular firm, and it's all about the acquisition of wealth. Where's the time to do political participation? Because Aristotle is hinting at in this chapter, and going to say more in the next, about the importance of political participation.
Hmm.
So that's part of that's a virtuous activity that's going to lead to a virtuous citizen slash virtuous life.
Interesting.
So even if you break down the time, like if you're busy doing X all the time, you have no time to develop, you know, other traits, um,
Yeah.
or do these other activities. Um, but that's just the basic element of the finitude of life and time. So, um, whatever. I've created a number of personal reading projects for myself that were supposed to start this fall. Gone, in light of the three kids and their schooling and the remote learning. Um, so I can't develop that part of myself right now. And now you just imagine the nature of work. I mean, think about all the things you can't do because you're doing school and work, and
Sure.
some things that you'd want to do, and maybe even some things that are virtuous,
Hmm.
right? Or spiritual, that work on your character. So I would add that piece
Sure.
um, to what he's saying, and that sort of bothered me too, with just like whatever. If I want to become a polymath and a polyglot, you know what? That sucks because I'm 47 now and I've got like what, another 40 years maybe. So it's like crunch time.
Right.
Um, but and then I would add too that it's not an end to shoot for, because the end is going to be virtue and happiness. So it seems like a moderate amount of money will will is necessary to take care of the basic necessities so that you can develop this part of yourself.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah, I think that makes sense. This kind of
I guess the difference. Let me add one thing,
yeah.
and
Go
I'll
ahead.
shut up. The one difference would maybe be someone that is super rich, and they, like a Bill Gates or something like that.
What do you
And
mean?
then after they, well, like a Bill Gates, where you've done all this work your whole life, you've built up this mega corporation, and now you're sitting on billions of dollars, and
Hmm.
then you're able to do philanthropic work and get involved. So that would be my one exception, where you've sort of done your wealth acquisition, and now you've got tons of free time to be, if you will, politically involved.
Right.
I think that
So
might be a possible exception to the rule that
they're playing the long
Aristotle.
game, but they're like their heads in the
Yeah,
right place, right?
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
some of the things you were mentioning about, especially with time, made me think of something that was discussed in that computer ethics class that I took last year, and it was the idea that we are a result of our environment.
Hmm.
Um, so it's like life may be unlimited or have unlimited possibilities, but in reality, all the options we're faced with are, you know, bound by the environment that we're in.
Hmm.
So we can choose a life from one of those options or a subset of, those things that are provided by our surroundings, but we can't actually access any of the unlimited lives, right? Because it's all
Yeah.
restricted by, our personality, the people we grew up with, just, the things literally around us, throughout the entire universe. Um,
Hmm.
it's all related. It's it makes me think of the structuralism idea again, where like everything's connected, whether you think about it or
Yeah.
not. It's like, the butterfly effect to a degree. Something
Yeah.
tiny
Hmm.
on the other
Hmm.
side of the world could have an effect on, something you're doing now. Just because
Totally.
like the coronavirus, like that happened in China and it came about and
Yeah.
affected the entire Earth. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, we're bound by our environment. Um, so the last thing that I kind of got from this, which was, interesting, but I feel like this idea that the good life has limits kind of resonates with the Christian view. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
so like if you look at like Romans 6, which talks about being a slave to sin or being a slave to righteousness,
Sure.
the righteous life will be limited, but from a moral perspective, it will be better than being free.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Yes.
so it has
Exactly.
this idea of limits. It might be from a different perspective, but I think it applies.
You know what's interesting too? I was going to say this earlier,
Hmm.
that what's the one of the purpose of his um, sorry of the city is, oh gosh, I can, oh yeah, yeah, is that the within his city, the the intention is really to change and alter your character,
Hmm.
to make the citizens morally good. It's assuming you aren't. You're not finished. You are potentia. You're potential, but you're not it.
Sure.
As a child, as outside of the city, let's say, the perfect city. So what's interesting here is the like you were talking about limits, and how limits can actually bring about, so about total freedom, right? This
Hmm.
whole idea of like, I want to be myself, I want to do whatever I want, express my autonomy and all that. But the limit can actually bring about a higher good.
Hmm.
And what's interesting too is the city does that because the purpose of the city is to change your character, to improve your character. And that's really interesting because that, I think, also goes against sort of some of our notions, our general notions about what a government should do or what a city should do.
Sure.
Because we're more like I would say that pretty much everyone in the United States, we want everyone else to be law abiding.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that in so being law abiding, your that your character is being developed at all.
Right.
It basically means that you're following a bunch of rules, but you could still be like vicious on the inside.
Hmm.
So what's interesting about him, and I don't, I think this point in particular would rub a lot of people in the United States the wrong way, or in a lot of countries, where we want law abiding for sure, but we don't want the government to shape our character.
Hmm.
And he's really saying that the government, and let's say by government we mean the city and everything that goes on within it, and its laws and its citizenry, is to shape character, which means which here's the point. The limit thing you brought up is sort of like a shaping element, right?
Yeah.
I'm not doing X in
Hmm.
order to become Y, and it made me sort of think about that. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
seriously, if you had a a candidate say that I am interested in shaping your character into a virtuous person, it would just seem so odd. And let's say it was even spoken well, unlike just now. It would just seem so odd to our ear, because a lot of the talk is what I can do for you or how I can protect your freedoms, of X, Y, and Z, but not. You might be able to look at some elements and say by curbing this, right?
Yeah.
Like whatever, making something illegal, it shapes character. But a lot of times, what happens when you make when during Prohibition, right? It's not like people. Maybe some people stopped drinking,
Mm-hmm.
and it made them a better person. But then you end up having people sort of like finding loopholes and hiding out and doing their thing,
Right.
or even with abortion too. When abortion was illegal prior to Roe v. Wade, people were finding doctors that would do it or doing sort of illegal versions of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's an interesting. I feel like he comes up with some interesting notions here. The one I brought up about the partnership as the foundation as opposed to a constitution, a written constitution, and then this element that it's funny. We want this to happen in a family. You
Yeah.
expect character development to happen in a family.
Mm-hmm.
He expects the city to do the same.
Yeah, and
But my sense.
I think that that also follows the idea of the philosopher king that Plato and Socrates brought up, with
Mm-hmm,
the king's best interest is the people. Um,
mm-hmm,
it also kind of follows the Old Testament view of the kings, in the Bible, how they were,
mm-hmm.
for the people. It makes me wonder if there's an aspect of that in our government at like the state or city level, but not necessarily at
Yeah,
the national level.
better. Yeah, yeah,
I feel like that's the case. I want it to be the case.
yeah.
um,
I think indirectly, we like at least you look for, or at least this is the language of politics
mhm.
that's broadcast to us. That we I'm going to just set Trump aside as an exception, but generally candidates want to portray themselves as moral and law abiding and a good family man or woman.
Mhm.
So at least implicitly there's a sense that this is going to attract voters because they'll be a good role model, or we would want someone that is virtuous in this position. It's a little bit different though. It's not going the full length of character formation.
Yeah, this just made me think of like the divide between church and state because I feel like churches are very
Mm-hmm.
focused on this topic. Like,
Yeah.
you have the leaders in the church and they very much care about the people, of the body of the church, and that's their entire goal and if informing their character. And in our society, we've kind of separated that from the government. So I
Right.
wonder if that
I
kind of,
think you're absolutely right.
yeah, that kind of has that
Totally.
that aspect.
I would argue, other than sort of prayer and adoration and celebrating the religion, right, or worshiping God. I would say that goodness, you've got there's like massive ethical component of religion,
Yeah.
massive,
Mhm.
and um, and that's an interesting thought. To what degree the separation has been more about, okay, well, churches over here are going to do this, families, it's up to families to do this, but it's up to the government to whatever, create a safe world, a safe environment,
Yeah.
a law and order, um, and then, well, from another perspective, supporting the rights of various groups, etc.
If you put it
Um,
blatantly, it almost seems like the church doesn't care about. I mean, sorry, the government doesn't care about our character. It just cares about
yeah,
our safety or our protection.
yeah,
But the church,
hmm
or I guess you can expand the church to other views, but the church does
yeah,
care about our character. It cares about all of them.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think the only way, to sort of look at other elements, maybe you could look at public schools, as being a part of the government and interested not in just educating. So I'm just saying this. I'm just sort of like trying here.
Mm-hmm.
Not just interested in educating pragmatically, but also in character formation as well. I mean, whatever. I was looking at one of the little videos that Michael was watching. It was this little short YouTube video that the teachers had them watch live, I guess, altogether, about being nice and being kind.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, minor, but also sort of anti-bullying, things like that. There's some element I can see going on at the school, which is government sponsored. But in terms of legislation, federal laws, state laws, local.
Oh, hello? I think you cut out. Did your earbuds die? Can you hear me? Hello? I can't, Dad. Oh, goodness. Oh my goodness. Can you hear me? He's still talking. I can hear you, but it's very quiet. I didn't really catch what you were
Sorry,
saying.
because my things finally died.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering. So the last like minute or minute and a half I did not get.
Okay, so basically, when we finally in our reading get to the level of the Supreme Court documents and the Constitution, it'll be interesting to see to what degree character formation will come up,
Mm-hmm.
or if it's just more about, as I said, sort of safety of the populace, and protecting freedoms.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Um, we should probably wrap it up, but I will say we might want to start next week with at least addressing the slavery question, because not to mention that is a massive oversight.
Yeah, that's fair.
Um, we should probably open with that. Yeah, because I think the two elements I think we should open up with is why man is considered a political animal. You said some interesting things there, and then some of that is actually connected um, to his view of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
So cool,
Yeah, that sounds good.
awesome. Wish me well on my operation,
Yes,
and have a good rest of the week. I know you've got a lot to do, and then enjoy the weekend. At least try to.
I will. You
Okay,
too, man.
awesome, man. Love you.
Love you too.
We'll talk.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers.